When we think about talent as a competitive differentiator, it's because people can bring a lot of new ideas, new energy to your organization. What we want to think about is, what are the types of values we're looking for? What are the types of experiences that we want to create for people? And making sure that we're recruiting, we're building in alignment with where we want to go as an organization.
People, process, technology. The secret is that that's the order of importance. Yet while plenty of time, energy, and money is spent on building strategies for the last two, talent strategies are too often overlooked. Just like other enterprise strategies, you need to continuously reevaluate your talent strategy on at least an annual basis to make sure your staff have the skills to be able to deliver effectively. Joining me today to discuss how we can build an annual talent strategy is AVP of Research, Carleen McCubbin. Thanks for joining me, Carleen.
Thanks, Jeff. And I loved that intro. It was completely right.
Thank you. So, on that point and just expanding, what is a talent strategy and, why should we care?
So talent strategy is really an extension to your overall IT or enterprise strategy, but it looks at the people component. And while your strategy is telling you all these great projects or initiatives in the direction that you're going in, if you don't have the people or the skills or the organization that's going to support that, strategy is ultimately going to fall flat. And so once we know where we want to go, now we have to make sure we have the people or the technology, even AI, however you want to partner, to really make sure that's a reality. And so a talent strategy really looks at how to make that possible and all the elements that go into it.
So Carleen, you and I both know the reality out there is there's just not enough organizations who are taking talent strategy seriously. And so, what are some of the drawbacks of that? What are the risks? And what happens when we miss that piece of the puzzle?
I think the risk of not having a talent strategy is enormous. What happens when you miss that part of the puzzle is that you do not have the capacity or the capability to execute. It's as simple as that. People are how the work gets done. At least today it still is until the robots come in. But people are how the work gets done and to quality. And so if you don't know the skills that you need, the roles that you need to have in your organization, if you're not preparing for the future of what that looks like, you're just not going to be able to deliver. And that's a huge risk to the organization.
Absolutely. And so when we look at what a talent strategy is, we've identified 4 pillars. Can you walk me through what are those 4 pillars and why are they important?
Yeah, so there's 4 core components that we look at in our talent strategy research. One is culture, org structure, recruitment and retention, and learning and development. And these are the 4 core pillars of what you need to think about on an ongoing basis. And so when we think about culture, we're not just thinking about your cat posters on the wall that have your great values and things like that, although quite adorable. They don't necessarily always resonate. And so what we want to think about on an annual basis when it comes to culture is, how do we live those values, right? How does it show up on a day-to-day basis? Are our stated values what we're experiencing in real life, right? And why not? Mm-hmm. And how do we encourage the type of behaviors in order to make that happen? And this is important for organizations who are going from maybe more traditional service delivery to more, of an exponential IT future where they want to go to more innovative delivery. How do you get there? You have to change the way people think about activities, how we reward different types of actions. And so thinking through culture to values to behaviors to reinforcement of that is a really important thing. You need to look at it on an annual basis. The second area that we look at is org structure. And Jeff, you know me fairly well at this point. Org structure is like my favorite topic to talk about, so I'll reel it in for this conversation. But really, when we're looking at org structure on an annual basis, you're not doing a greenfield approach. We're not going to rip and replace your org structure and completely go back to, green page or a blank slate each year. But every year, you should be thinking about, do we have roles that'll allow us to deliver? Does our span of control make sense? Do we know who's accountable and responsible for the most critical capabilities and how we're measuring that, right? If you don't have an accurate balance of workload to your priorities, then you're not going to be able to execute again. So again, it's not start all over, but it's let's make sure this makes sense. Let's make sure we have the roles that are important for our organization. We really want to take a look at that on an ongoing basis as well. Third, we go into recruitment and retention. And recruitment and retention is a huge area. And really in this, we're looking at all the way from candidate experience to, employee experience. And that includes everything through to offboarding, right? So when we look at that practice and the process, we're not going to reinvent your recruitment process and tell HR, hey, that's not working for me. Let's throw out all the things you're doing. But what we are going to say is, let's look at these practices and processes. Where are we having blockers? Where are we struggling to get good talent? Where are we having success? And where are the opportunities to partner? So just taking a look at an annual basis, what do we need to do? How long does it take us to recruit for a position? Therefore, when should we start recruitment, right? Logical things that we don't make time for, right? And so in this, we want to figure out, how do we optimize that process? How do we figure out the core roles we need to look at? And then how do we workforce plan in a way that allows us to succeed?
Right.
And then finally, skills. No talent strategy is complete without thinking through the skills that you need for the future, right? So how does this impact your learning and development? How does this impact learning opportunities that you want to provide to your employees? And how are you going to support people in actually getting those learning opportunities? And so as we go through, we want to look through these 4 pillars, create decisions, make decisions about the changes that need to happen, and also establish a long-term roadmap for these are the things we're going to do this year to be really successful when it comes to people.
So, the research is called Build an Annual Talent Strategy. And one of the key insights we've got here is that this is not meant to be kind of set it and forget it. What's the importance on having that kind of annual cadence? Is that the right cadence? And how should we be thinking about how this becomes, a process rather than just a project?
Annual for me, annual at minimum. It should really be a once it's created, it should be a living and breathing document that you create. But ultimately, your talent strategy needs to be reviewed and reconsidered anytime you're making strategic changes, anytime you're making a change in your values or what you're going for, what your priorities are. Maybe there's a new AI imperative. You need to look at your talent strategy to make sure you can deliver. And so I'd say annual at least, and if not, doing it on a more regular basis.
One of our key insights we've got from this research is all about adaptability and it being, kind of a key foundational element here. And, more often than not, it sounds like it's missing. What do we mean by that? And why is this so important when it comes to talent strategy?
Adaptability is really at the core of your talent as well, because we want to make sure we're not just hiring for one specific role, one specific function, one specific way of working or execution of that process, because all of those things are changing. You'll even see when we're doing recruitment or we're doing job descriptions, we're no longer really hiring for specific types of technology workers because all of that is fluid and flexible, right? We need to make sure that we have the competencies that we need so that people can move from role to really engage in the organization and drive it forward. And so on the one hand, we want an adaptable workforce in terms of their skills and what they bring together. The other thing is we want to have people in the right roles so that we can be adaptable as an organization.
Right.
A lot of organizations, they'll have an open headcount. Someone will leave their role and it will take up to 6 months for them to hire for that. Even it could take 3 months to get approval for that. And so I like to call that ghost protocol, where you have just everyone's swarming together because there's this huge gap. And what do you do in that case, right? A talent strategy helps you to minimize that gap, right? To make sure that you have a ready workforce day one after a transition. And this is great for employee development too, because now I'm working with my team on what's their next after next. I can help people to get into their next position, which is not only good for the employee, it's good for the workforce, and it's good for the enterprise because now I can deliver on what I've promised.
When we think about what it means to be adaptable, by being able to have employees who are adaptable, it ultimately leads to a more adaptable workforce and supports the actual goals of the organization.
Exactly. So you got a new priority that comes in and you got nobody who has the skills to do that. How does that hold you up from being able to deliver? If you've got a project that comes in and you're at half capacity because you've got people who have left, how does that hold up your ability to deliver, right? And so we think about these things from a strategy planning. Well, we need all these things, but you think about how that translates to the human element of that. And true workforce planning will incorporate not just the people element, but then how can we leverage technology to streamline and improve these processes, which is also part of what we look at in the research is what are the opportunities to automate? What doesn't need to be done through human intervention, but can be delivered through AI or other technologies, right? In partnership with our teams.
So the last insight that we covered is that talent and a focus on talent really has the opportunity to be a competitive differentiator. How are we seeing organizations take advantage of this?
Yeah, And I think this is important because when we think about talent as a competitive differentiator, it's because people can bring a lot of new ideas, new energy to your organization. And so how you look at where you're recruiting from, the types of skills, the type of work they would even be doing, can really either bring great energy to your organization or deflate the whole system, right? And so when we think about talent as a competitive differentiator, what we want to think about is, what are the types of values we're looking for? What are the types of experiences that we want to create for people? And making sure that we're recruiting, that we're building in alignment with where we want to go as an organization. Also within this, we see that, making sure that we're hiring for diversity, to encourage diversity of thought, diversity of opinion, accessibility into what we're creating, right? And when you think differently about the type of talent you bring in, you create different solutions. And that's where the competitive differentiator really comes through is, can we think differently about the way we create products and services for our customers? And how do we work differently as a group? And that's where talent can really, really change the game for you.
I'm hearing a lot of opportunities around like fresh talent. Fresh talent is a huge opportunity. A lot of organizations right now, there may be less of an ability to do that, right? Whether it's a hiring freeze or just a mandate of like trying to do the best with what we've got. Yeah. How does that impact your talent strategy, and what can we do with current staff to inject some of that kind of new thinking?
Yeah, and thanks for calling that out, because it's not all about the new kids on the block, right? It is about how we encourage our teams as well. And so I think our existing teams are actually where your biggest opportunities are. Because when you think about creating career strategies, career ladders for individuals, you can help them to follow their passions, right? You can create roles around what people are really interested in. It's interesting, actually. We see a huge trend around skills-based organizations. And a lot of people will say we're entering the era of individualization. And what that means is that the expectations of the workforce become a lot more personalized into how people want to work, right? And by doing so, by playing into people's passions, by encouraging their development, by going to a learning first type of mindset, you're able to not only engage and retain great employees, but you're also able to prepare them for their next role as well. So I think there are always going to be people in your organization who want to go on that journey. And then you have your trusted operators in the organization who maybe don't want to, completely revolutionize and completely change the way they're working. And there are ways to engage that as well. So when I go back to thinking about culture, right, and the behaviors that we want to recognize, we can't just recognize and reward the new shiny things that people are doing. Yeah. We also have to make sure we're recognizing and reinforcing delivery of exceptional, operational services and delivery of our core foundations as an organization as well. And so when you're thinking about it from a talent perspective, we look at all of the employee personas in order to create that and make sure it makes sense for you.
That makes sense. And I like the tie back to culture as well, because I guess we need to figure out what good looks like from an employee perspective to create some of those reward systems and get that kind of, get the ball rolling in terms of this is kind of our true north.
Yeah, and such a good point, because recognition, reinforcement, it's personal, right? I mean, we like a lot of the same stuff, but that doesn't mean that what inspires and motivates you is going to have any impact on me, right? And so when you're thinking about reinforcing this, you got to think about different people in your organization. How do you really motivate them? Not at a group level, but really down to the individual. And it's that individual motivation connected back to your vision that really drives results.
Joining me on our panel here today, we've got Brittany Lutz, Research Director, Amanda Matheson, Principal Research Director, and Carleen McCubbin, AVP of Research. Thanks so much for joining today. I want to jump right into it. We've talked about the importance of the 4 pillars underscoring talent strategy, and I wanted to ask each of you, is there, one pillar to rule them all? What's the pillar that's going to give you the most kind of return, or is the most important to get right? Brittany, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, after talking to many organizations and kind of looking at where we're going as a society, we're going to have to focus in on our skill sets. That means the learning and development. That means that we're not just sending our staff off to take a training course every quarter or every couple of months in order to gain these skills. It means, what are we doing to actually understand what the skills of the future are, and actively ensuring that our staff and our employees have the opportunities to work hands-on to get that skill set. So for me right now, if there was any pillar I think is most important, it would be the skills for learning and development.
Amanda, what's top of mind for you?
Well, I'm a little different than Brittany. I think it's culture. If you don't have a strong culture, you're not going to be in a space where you can learn. Culture is not a poster on a meeting room wall, it's how we treat each other. With technology and the advances and how fast it's changing, if we don't have this ability to have a supportive culture that encourages learning, making mistakes, learning, and moving on, and this culture of collaboration, this culture of any idea can come from anyone at any time, anywhere, that culture is required if we're going to face the future, because I think it actually holds up the others.
Carlene?
I agree with what they've both said, but I think for me, there isn't one that's actually most important. I think it starts with understanding your context, because I can't just say, for every organization, it's skills, for every organization, it's culture, or for most organizations, it's org structure. But what I can say is that you need to have a sense of where your strengths are and where you're weaker. How well are you partnered with HR? How has your vision and your culture changed? Because through COVID, we saw huge impacts on culture as a result of working from home. And that had a huge impact on how people felt about their work, how people were executing, and you really had to rebuild culture in a lot of ways. And so for me, it's not that one is more important than another, it's that the timing and the focus is different.
I like that.
I'm still going to push the idea, though, that your skill set is, to your point, going to ebb and flow, right? So when we all went virtual because of the pandemic, we had to learn different skill sets. We had to learn how to interact online. We had to learn how to have a meeting with people that you didn't pass in a hallway every day. And now we're going into a hybrid state, and organizations have people working from home and in the office. How do you collaborate? How do you create that culture? If you don't have the skill sets, you can have the best culture in the world defined, and people won't be able to execute in it.
Yeah, but on top of that, I could use that same logic to validate all the other pillars. Because I could say, in this new case, we had to think about roles differently because we had moved to much flatter organizational structures. So we had to reduce the amount of managers. And now when you were working remote, being able to actually manage a virtual workforce required you to reconsider your structure, reconsider your measures, how you're going to evaluate people. And so the same logic applies to structure and to recruitment, because you couldn't recruit in the same way as either. So again, while I agree with what you're saying, I think I could take that and rinse and repeat that argument for the other three.
But hang on a second. Without a strong culture that is connected to how people know you outside the workplace or the building, your employer brand, you're not going to be able to recruit. You're not going to be able to, again, create this piece around learning and development. And it's interesting too, because learning and development, career management, learning development were 2 and 3 on the most popular reasons why people leave organizations. So if and learning and development, I love what you said earlier, Brittany, about it doesn't happen in a dark classroom with PowerPoint slides. It's the bumps and the bruises that you get. So it's not about sending to programs. It's about, as a leader, how are you creating a culture where people can learn as they go and make those mistakes? So I'm back into my culture.
I love the approach of they're all important. I feel like that's a little bit like asking the genie for more wishes, but that's just fine. So I want to talk about culture for a minute here, because, culture, there's the adage about, culture eating strategy for breakfast and how kind of encompassing culture is. But, we can talk about it here as change your culture. And it's change my culture. Of course, I didn't think of that. But to actually work on changing your culture, you need the buy-in, I guess, of the entire organizational ladder. And so, to what degree does culture kind of radiate downward, and what impact can we have as leaders to get toward a culture we want in really tactical terms?
That's a great point, Jeff, if I may. One of the number one questions that I ask our members is, what is your culture? Describe it to me. And instantly I get blank stares from all of the IT leadership team. They cannot describe what their culture is. And so you start to give them some verbs and some ideas of what it could be, and they're like, okay, I think it's like this. Is that the culture you want? And instantly, blank stares again. people don't know the culture they have and they don't know the culture they want. So first being able to define what your culture is, if you can get to that point, that will help you immensely in understanding how do we want to change this culture to support where we're going.
Yeah, I agree. And if they can't describe it, some great questions to just uncover what it is today. Tell me a story when you were super proud to work there. Tell me a story when you were really frustrated with working there. Because through those stories, you can start to bring out some of the behaviors and some of the interactions. Because again, culture is how we treat each other. So through those two different stories, you can get into this, okay, here are the words I'm hearing. How do these resonate with you?
And I think to add on that and to go back to Jeff, what you were asking about, your organization does have its own culture as well. So there is a culture that is created and has to be started from your executive committee and endorsed throughout the entire organization. But how that's lived has to happen and happens in every interaction. And so we do a lot of work at Infotech too around employee experience. Employee experience isn't a once a year survey, it's every interaction you have throughout the year. And it's these moments that matter. And we see that on average, the average across your company might look the same week after week, month after month. But when you look at the individual level, it fluctuates like a heart monitor for a person in crisis, right? And so culture and management have to look at what that employee experience is and make sure it's lived on an ongoing basis, that the behaviors are reflective of it. And so yes, there's a corporate mandate for a certain type of culture, but how you enable that, how you enact that, that is at the IT level and it's at the team manager and individual level.
It does float from the top down. A manager or a leader having a bad day, walking into an environment can change the mood immediately. And it's interesting, so you brought up the EXM that we do, and I've done many EXM debriefs, and I'll see blips, and I'll like, what happened here? And if it's a blip up, it's like, oh, our senior leader talked about it in a town hall. Well, isn't that interesting? All of a sudden, people got happy. And response rates got up. So to your point, how are you creating the moments that matter? You need a lot of different response so you can get a good feel for what the audience is experiencing. And if you look at even those comments, you can come up with the words that describe current.
One of the things that isn't a pillar is employee engagement, which I think has been, we've been talking about employee engagement, employee experience. Is this as important as it was kind of once deemed, a handful of years ago? Is it falling out of vogue? What do we need to know? What do we need to be thinking about in the realm of employee engagement?
I don't want to throw it out, but I also want us to think different. Employee engagement is a good thing because you want your folks engaged. How we go about it is not a good thing. Too long, too late, not often enough. So it's those regular checks with the leaders, with their employees. Those are the best ways to engage and figure out back to the experience question. Mental health. Employee well-being, those are getting rolled in, and it's more important than, are you loyal to me? And do you have the energy to do discretionary work? Well, if you're not taking care of the first two and the experience is telling you that, the next question is going to be even harder. I think engagement, it's important, but I think we need to think about what leads into engagement and take more responsibility for actions around that, and not just focus groups that take forever.
Well, I want to talk for a minute about those very leaders because, what's the role of managers here? We've talked about talent strategy. It's either going to be done probably by a talent team, maybe it's done by, the leadership team. But, in my mind, what I'm thinking, there's an adage, and I don't know if your experience has borne it out, about like people don't leave organizations, they leave managers. How true is that? And to what degree should we be involving them in the strategy as well as in the execution of the strategy?
I was going to say nothing will throw your talent strategy off pace faster than a manager who will give an eye roll while the rest of the group is talking about it, right? So as a leadership team, you need to be in sync with where you want to go and why you want to go in that direction. And that's not to say that you can't have conversations openly and transparently with each other about why you think something may or may not work, or what other skill set or what other roles you see coming forward that you want to make sure get considered. But that means that you need to walk out of that room unified on where you're going with your talent strategy and why. And especially when it comes to the culture pillar, I'm going to say, if we all understand what the lived experience will look like for our staff, then we can go out and execute on that on a day-to-day basis. Versus if we're constantly thinking we know what it is, then we might not actually be reinstating the culture we are trying to go towards.
Yeah. And that table that the senior leaders are sitting at, they really need to be reaching into their front line. They're frontline leaders. They're at the front line. And they know the skills needed, they know the troubles they're having, they know the successes that they're experiencing. And they also know how the customer or consumer needs are changing, or how people are changing how they access services. So if each of those leaders that are in that room or at that table spend some time also talking to the folks that report into them that are people leaders, then I think you can get this strategy that can be bought into.
Right.
And I think the other piece is it's not communicated to everybody at the same time. Leaders need to get it in bite-sized pieces before the front line so they have
Right.
time to
You want to
internalize
cascade
it.
it downward.
Yeah.
That's true. The only thing that I'm thinking about as you're describing that is that managers, according to our data, frontline managers is the area where we have the biggest skills deficit, right? So we're saying let's bring the managers in. They're significantly more likely to feel stressed, burnt out, and they don't have the skills that they feel like they need in order to succeed in their roles. And so there's almost like an epidemic happening where frontline managers are more likely to leave the organization than others. People have moved into this role because they feel like this is the path up for us. And so they have to abandon some of their technical skill sets in order to move into these types of roles. And so when we look at the talent strategy, it's not just about the workers or the individual contributors, it's about the managers as well. And that's a role that I think is frequently overlooked because we're like, oh, they're a people manager. They're people, right? So I think that's one of the big issues. So we're going back to what you said, Jeff, like how do you involve the different layers in it? I think it's important to do so, but are they prepared to take that on? I don't know. And I think that's a risk as well, because if they don't know how to interact with that, they're not trained to support that, it could actually be an issue within your strategy as well.
Yeah, but leaving them out of the conversation also means that we're not prepping them for it. So will they be perfect the first time? Probably not. But yes, I completely agree. They are the overlooked group. The engagement, we talked about engagement. The engagement level as the manager is the ceiling of their team. So if it's low, you're in trouble. A lot of them don't have the skill sets that they need. And yet the leaders of those managers, by not involving them, also take away some development opportunities through experiencing the conversations, through experiencing the strategic decisions and the critical thinking about how do you run a team. And I think that's vitally important. But to your point, there does need to be that cautionary note, knowing they're not ready for it. So there's pressure on the leader of leaders to make sure that it's not just about an information pulling, it's also a development opportunity.
Right.
It's a great point.
Well, and I think that's the key of it too. And something Amanda always says too is that managers confuse who their team is.
Oh, okay.
Their team is not the people that they're managing. Their team is the other managers in the room. But so often we don't actually think of that as our team, right? Yeah. We think of our team as the people that we're working with on a day-to-day basis. And as a result, when they're advocating, they tend to advocate for what their team needs of people who report to them. And there is nobody advocating for those managers across the table, right? And I think that's where the gap is. And the talent strategy has to address that group as well, because they will be senior leaders likely, and they will be the ones making those decisions.
We're veering now into what Brittany was originally talking about, which is skills, right? That now we have a gap here with manager skills, and I know we're a little bit off topic here, but the notion of how do you upskill your managers? You move from a role that's probably more technical to a people leadership role. We're seeing it as extremely important, having a key role for the culture, for the various elements here. How do we upskill managers? How do we get them ready for this new role in this new world?
I'm just going to say one thing. Hire people for leadership skills, not their technical talent.
Right.
Okay. Well,
there's always a place for technical talent, of course. But when you are looking for an individual contributor versus a manager, you need to be looking at different skill sets that you're looking across, right? The business acumen skills of an individual contributor, I might expect, but I don't necessarily need leadership skills. Versus a people manager, I really need to lean into my leadership skills and maybe a little less business acumen. But even this year's Talent Trends report showed that everything from the entry-level IT employee to the CIO is spending more than 25% of their time on technical skills. Why are they spending 25% of their time doing technical work?
But does that surprise you really with the rise of AI? Like, I think that everybody should be spending more time understanding the impacts of that technology than maybe we would have said 3 years ago, because the impact of that from a risk, from an opportunity perspective, is completely different.
But I take that as a business skill, right? If I'm understanding the risks associated with it, the opportunities for our organization, it's a business skill set.
But as the IT leader, you need to know how it actually works, right? You need to have a good sense and not the details. You don't need to know 100% of how AI works.
There's a piece here though that I want to zoom in on a little bit, which is like learning mindset and adaptability as being kind of key skills or key traits for people here. To what degree do we believe, to what degree are you seeing, and do you believe that this is actually something that's like coachable and trainable, or, do you need to just make sure you hire an adaptable employee to begin with?
I think adaptability is the most important skill set to hire for. So people who are willing to try new things, to put themselves on the line, who have a sense of resilience and can demonstrate where they've shown resilience. I think it's actually the most important trait that we have in an organization. Do I think adaptability is coachable? I don't think so. I don't know. You can coach on it, but I think people have to be willing.
Right.
Yeah.
And if they're not willing, then you have a different problem. I
Because
think you guys
adaptable.
So it makes perfect sense.
But no, but you're right. The person has to be coachable. I think you can coach it. A good coach will ask good questions that help people reflect on an experience. What went well, what didn't go well. As human beings, we always learn more when we've made a mistake or an error, right? If there's a pain point, we learn better because we're trying to overcome it. So that's coachable.
But you have people who just are in some organizations, sorry, Bertie, who are counting down to maybe retirement, who have visibly said to you, this job isn't my priority. I'm here to get paid. And so there are people who just do not want to be coached and who will not embrace that growth mindset and operate better in more of a fixed mindset. And that's all they want to do. So I don't know.
Using them as subject matter experts for organizational knowledge, that's how you can engage them. You may not get them into the next world because they're kicking and screaming, and that's fine. But there's still a role in terms of mentor or that experience, or again, that organizational history. And I don't mean history in terms of, we tried that, it didn't work last time. I'm not talking that. I'm talking about what have been the pain points? How has the organization progressed? How have we sold our product? How have we created new product?
Which goes back to work structure, Amanda.
I have 2 points on this. The first is we have a new generation coming into the workforce who is way more adaptable, right? So I think to your question about can you train adaptability, maybe we won't need to in the future. Maybe people just be coming in with adaptability built in. The other factor is back to how good your managers are. If you don't have managers who can train adaptability, who don't understand adaptability themselves, how are they ever going to get their staff coached up to that?
I did want to ask a little bit about upskilling and how we can develop our existing employees. And I think when leaders hear about upskilling, I think sometimes their gut reaction is, well, how much is this going to cost me? Oh, you want me to get my employee an MBA? Is that what you're saying by upskilling? Does that have to be the case? Are there more creative ways to do it? How can you reinvest in employees without, breaking the bank and while being conscious of the work that still has to be done?
So at Infotech, we actually think that you should be constantly upskilling, but we talk about the 70-20-10 method. So 70% of your learning should really be on the job through, new projects, stretch assignments, maybe partnering with other people in your organization. because adults learn best by doing, right? And by experiencing that in real time and being given the opportunity to grow and stretch. So 70% of your time should be spent doing that, which is great because it doesn't cost you anything, except for maybe a little bit of extra time. 20% of that time should be spent on more relational opportunities. So through mentorship, coaching, advisory services, things like that, where you're learning from people who have done that role before and can advise you and provide feedback or coaching on that. And then 10% can be done through more formal learning channels. And when we're doing more formal learning channels, we want to focus on core competencies, critical skill sets. Like, for example, right now we see an emerging threat around cybersecurity or an AI. And so our workforce development programs are designed to pinpoint and target those areas to get you ready. Our management fundamentals programs and things like that really focus more on how do we prepare that next generation of leaders to not only learn core concepts, apply them, practice them in a way that allows them to, build that muscle, right? Which you wouldn't be able to do necessarily on a relational basis. And it requires a little bit more coaching and guidance from other people, right? So it's about figuring out that balance between 70, 20, 10. And you can usually do that when you look at people's role profiles, right? And see what those opportunities are and tie that really closely with your performance management and your measures.
Yeah, and I'd like to say too, the programs that Carlene's just mentioned actually incorporate all of it, right? So is the focus, the skill set, the delivery of the competency? Yes, but we've also done this online, built an ecosystem around coaching, doing some online real application, as well as coaching the leaders of the participants to coach. So we're creating that ecosystem. And I also remember in some of the interviews I did with CIOs, the one thing that came up more and more and more was this notion of we learned best, or we asked, the question was, what was the most critical learning that you had in your career? All of them talked about an enterprise-wide project because it immersed them in the business. Nobody said I went to a program.
Yeah.
Well, and I also, again, to the new generation coming forward, a lot of them didn't go to college or post-secondary schooling because the pandemic was happening. So they don't have that degree anymore. They have, I went and I learned it myself. I had a coffee chat with somebody else. I built this project just so that I could have a sandbox to play in and experiment myself, right? So we have people who are coming into the workforce that did the other learning principles. They didn't go to your formal academic programs. And that's really opening up a lot of opportunities for us to say, it worked then, why aren't we leaning into it on the day-to-day for work? Yeah. And we also see people eliminating the formal education requirement from job postings, which is great for a lot of individuals who maybe didn't have the means to go to post-secondary education, or they were able to be adaptable and learn themselves.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me. This has been a very fun and very insightful panel. So as we're talking about building out your annual or more talent strategy, what are the different phases that we're looking at? What are the steps?
Yeah, absolutely. So we start with a preparatory phase that's all about the planning. So we'll start with an overall, what we call sort of a talent audit, right? Let's look at the core measures, how you're performing against each of the 4 core pillars that we look at. And we start to look at, okay, how are we performing today? We actually leverage our internal Infotech IT staffing diagnostic to really understand where are people spending their time today? What is their perception of skills, of the headcount that we need in the organization, the existence of barriers? And so we take a data-driven start to understanding what's the talent landscape look like today? Do people feel like we're prepared for the future, right? We'll also take a look at your existing strategy to say what's changing about what you need to deliver, right? And so this context setting is really important because it sets the stage for what needs to change, what's working well, and how do we optimize and improve, right? So we start with this overall talent audit, and then we go pillar by pillar. So we are going to create essentially a roadmap for each of these core pillars of quick win activities and initiatives that you can do within the 12-month period in order to optimize your talent. And so, for example, around culture, we'll refine your culture statement, define those behaviors, and tie it to recognition. On org design, we'll do an audit of your existing org structure, identify changes to span of control, new divisions, new departments, new roles that need to exist. And then look a little bit about, okay, are there things we don't need to do anymore? Maybe we've migrated to cloud and we're going to decommission some of our existing infrastructure. What does that mean for those individuals? How do we redeploy, retrain, upskill in order to take on new roles? So we'll go through that and figure out, what does that really look like? Does that mean we need to do job postings, training, whatever that is, right? So we'll get a clear state of your plan for your org structure based on facts and data, which is great. And then we'll go into recruitment and retention and learning and development, and we'll review all of your needs in those different areas. Have a quick plan for what roles we want to recruit for when, what are the blockers that are resulting in it taking 6 months for us to hire? How do we shorten that down to 1 month or 1 week even, or 0 days, right? And so we go through each of these things to really identify how can we improve in those different areas, to really practical solutions that you can implement nearly immediately.
Is this big bang or is this modular? How have we kind of designed this?
So both, right? So I think the opportunity is, I think you need to look at all 4 of these things every single year. And I suggest going through that in a systematic process so that you can think about the data, because they're all connected. It's not like I can change org structure and not think about learning or not think about recruitment, right? So for me, there's a huge amount of insight and value that comes when you look at it holistically. So I like to look at it all. But say you have a problem specifically with recruitment. I'm not gonna be like, hey, but let's go back there and start with your org structure or start with culture, right? So there's an opportunity for you to modularize that, to look at each of these things based on your own pain points, right? And really think through all of the details. So I guess the answer is both. At the end of the day.
What are the actual, outputs? What do you walk away from as you walk through this kind of methodology?
Yeah, so the first thing that we look at is, you do have your culture statement, your new org structure, a roadmap for all of the different areas. But what we're also creating in this, which is super helpful, is our talent strategy map. So the talent strategy map has a clear sense of, for each of those core pillars, what's our goal and what are we trying to achieve? So that we always know why we're doing these things. So it grounds the overall talent strategy. And with that, we have core measures and a dashboard associated with that. So you can track your progress on an ongoing basis. And additionally, we've got a core spaces for how you can identify your core initiatives, who's accountable, what the reporting structures are going to look like, right? So that it takes it from a theoretical plan to something you can really easily operationalize. You can bring up in every management meeting and really take action on it.
It gets integrated into your actual, your overall strategy.
Exactly. It's part of your standard cadence of when we're looking at, when we're having leadership meetings, right?
We talk about doing this annually to continually. How long does it take to get this, kind of set up and running?
You can spend you can spend tons of time on this, right? Because there's so many different avenues and levels of detail and depth that you can go into. I think to make it realistic though, bookmark a week for it, right? Bookmark a day for each of the core different pillars, a little bit of time for the audit, and get through that so you can action it, right? If you let this drag out throughout the year, we know you're gonna have other priorities, you're gonna have risks that come up, things that happen. And so dedicate the time to it, get a little offsite with your team maybe to really be able to kickstart and get this happening so that you can action it and be ready for the rest of the year.
This is a space where, when we look at, the large enterprise space, within technology, you may have kind of a, IT or technology talent team that can kind of, take this and run with it. But for a lot of, kind of more mid-market shops, maybe, the long tail of enterprises, you may not have that. And so, who does the CIO, who in this space, can support these pillars and make sure that this gets done?
In large organizations, you may have a team that has accountability for workforce planning, for recruitment, learning and development in those cases. And you're right, in that case, it does make sense for them to take it. But at the end of the day, the CIO needs to sponsor this, and it really should be co-led across the leadership team, because they're the ones who are going to have better insight into how things are actually working and functioning, the challenges that they're having across the roadmap as well. With that doesn't mean that the CIO needs to own every single action item on that, but what they do need to know is, what do we want to do and who's going to own this and move forward with it? And that needs to be a person who has authority and autonomy to get that work done. So typically we're working with the leadership team across organizations.
I'm thinking now about kind of, continuous talent strategy. And I wanted to ask you, you've worked with all sorts of organizations that are doing this. What does that look like? What are the best organizations doing differently?
When it comes to specifically talent strategy or talent in general?
The talent and talent strategy.
So I think from a talent strategy perspective, the thing that really differentiates organizations is when they connect their talent and their overall organizational strategy, which for some reason people think are separate. And in a way, a lot of our organizations abstract the ownership of the talent strategy to their HR department. And Lord love them, but they do not know the intricacies always of how your business works, what you need to do. And so the accountability really needs to be owned within the IT department for this. And a partnership needs to be forged with the HR department, right? For a lot of our government clients, you're not going to change recruitment. You're not going to change the labor laws that you're required to follow, the union practices.
Yeah.
But what you can do is figure out ways that you can reduce blockers. And so a strong partnership with HR is really critical for making this happen. And I think that is one of the key differentiators that we see. I think the other thing that more advanced organizations do around this is they think about it in terms of the values and the outcomes, not specific jobs. We need this specific job with these responsibilities, T9 capabilities. And they think about it instead of how do we create value across the organization? What types of competencies would we bring in order to drive that? So thinking about their talent and their roles in more of a fluid way versus like a strict headcount way.
It's almost more like team-based versus individual-based.
Exactly.
Well, Carlene, this has been really insightful. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. And if you need help with your talent, let me know.
Sounds great. And for anyone interested in learning more about building an annual IT talent strategy, check out the full blueprint at infotech.com.